Before I go into more details, I'm going to share my screen. And Doug, do you mind hitting record whenever you're ready?
Yeah, we're recording now.
Okay, awesome. So as Doug introduced, my name is Ha, and I'm currently a Senior Data Analyst at Unbounce. So a little bit about me, because you might wonder, who's this lady talking to us today? So I grow my passion for customer behavior during the time I went to undergrad at University of Cincinnati for marketing and business economics majors. And then fast forward, I graduated, worked a little bit, and went on to get my Master of Data Science at UBC. That decision was because, I feel like with my passion for customer behavior, but my current skill set at that moment didn't allow me to have to deal with such huge amount of data for a customer. So I'm saying, okay, let's do it. Let's go for a Master of Data Science to get that those skill sets. And once I graduated, I started working, and I feel like, okay, this is the right time to give back to the community. So I decided to be the co-organizer for Women in Data Science Vancouver, and we do our annual event every March. But next year probably it'll be virtual. And a little fun fact about me, I have a corgi, and I literally bring her to work every day, in office or at home. So that's about me. But today I'm gonna talk about something that I'm very passionate about as well, besides customer behavior. I want to talk to you about the boring stuff, besides the juicy analysis. So what is this boring stuff? I'm gonna tell you later, but just a quick note that during my master's degree in data science, what I was thinking is that, well, let's bring me all the machine learning, all the statistical analysis. I don't care about this boring stuff. But then when I started working, I was like, oh, I wish I read more about that. I prepare better so that I felt more confidence going into my job right now. So that being said, I hope to send you home some skill or some tips about this boring stuff. Okay, but before I go to the boring stuff, I want to talk about my company a little bit, Unbounce, because this will give you some context around the example, the analysis example I will go into later on. So Unbounce, we are a software as a service company, and we provide landing page builder. Now, let's pause for questions. How many people here know what is a landing page? You can raise your hand. I can still see you. Oh, awesome. Some of you do. Okay, but because some of others don't know, I'm gonna walk you through landing page 101 in a minute. So what is a landing page exactly? When you see, when you search on Google or Facebook, you might see some advertisements popping up for you. If you're interested in the content of that advertisement, you decide to click in. And that advertisement will lead you to land on a page with all the information relevant to that advertisement and to you. And so that we call a landing page. So initially, a marketer will work closely with a designer and a developer to design a landing page. Well, that sounds like a very long and expensive process to me. So Unbounce provide these tools that marketer can subscribe monthly or annually and create and publish their landing page easily. Just drag and drop like this. They can also have multiple variants for each page and run A/B tests with. Okay, so that's landing page. And at Unbounce, we have over 18,000 customers all over the world. In terms of culture, we are listed as one of the Canadian most admired corporate culture in 2019. I'm also very proud to say that we have reached gender parity in October last year as well. And in terms of our data department, we have 16 people and 3 data dogs, including my dogs. Okay. And so because I talk about the data department, we divide data department into two divisions, the product facing one and the decision science. So the product facing one is the team that focus in R&D and building features using machine learning that help our customer to optimize their page. For example, one of those features is called the smart traffic, which you can check out on Unbounce website. It's pretty cool. Another thing that product facing is doing is that they gather all the data from the traffic of our customers' pages to gather insight and share those insights to a customer to help them understand how to optimize the page and be more competitive in the landscape of marketing. And one of the product is the customer benchmark report. You can also check it online as well. But the decision science is basically using all the data, whatever technique it is, to support Unbounce to make data informed decisions. And I'm working in this division, the data decision science part. But what exactly it is, you might ask. So the decision part, it comes from my stakeholders, which are the product management, sales, finance team. They are the people who make decisions for a company. And the science part comes from the data analysts, my team. But as you can see here, it's too far away. Like data analyst is too far away from the business. And we want to bring ourselves closer to the business, to bring data closer to the business. And in order to do this, it's not statistical analysis alone. It is project management. And this involves a lot of communication to different teams, collaboration and time management, stakeholder management, etc. And project management is that boring stuff I want to talk to you about today. So my goal is two things. I want to show you how data analysts collaborate with different teams to solve problems. And the second goal is that throughout this presentation, I'm going to walk you through an example that compare the difference in behavior, customer behavior, and I will introduce you two notions, statistical significance and practical significance. Okay, so let's get to it. Before I move on, is there any question? And Doug, I hope you help me to see hands up if there are any.
Yeah, if anyone does have a question, feel free to unmute yourself and you can just ask away.
Cool. All right, that sounds like I can move on. So let's talk about that. Every project will start from a question. So at the end of July, my stakeholder from product management reached out to me and say, hey, I have this list of all definitions of customer skill levels. Can you help us to validate whether these definitions make sense? So now let's pause for another question. What do you think would be the next step? Anyone can unmute and guess.
Probably want
Is it? Yeah, go ahead.
with the product manager to see that your understanding of that list makes sense to you and that you're both on the same page.
Exactly. You got it right. And the next step, the very next step after that is the fact finding. Because it's an ambiguous question, to be honest. And we need to ask some context, like, hey, why do you need this? What will you do with this information in the end? Because sometimes they come with us like with a solution in their mind. But when we talk to them and gradually figure out the end goal, we might suggest them that, hey, maybe there's this analysis we already did that might help you to answer most of your questions. We don't need to spend more time working on this. things like that. And then it's very important to understand how urgent do they need this, because if we are in a, so at Unbounce, the data analyst team, we're working in sprints, so very agile. As the sprint has 2 weeks, and if they come to us with like a question in the middle of the sprint, and say I needed it in two days, I don't think I can do that for you, because I'm promising all the stakeholders to deliver by the end of the sprint. So it's so important to understand that timeline. And then, yeah, clarify, because it's an ambiguous questions. In this case, I would ask, okay, what do you mean by validate? And so with all those questions, I get the answer back. And first, for this list, they want to target customers for a new feature that our company is building. And second, they want to decide to target these customers based on the skill level. And the skill levels are all defined in this document. About the timeline, because there is a presentation my stakeholder needs to present on September 15th. So we need to work backward from there and making sure that she has all the information she needed. And then we clarify the questions. Basically, it's like, is there any difference in behavior among these groups? Because if there are no difference, then maybe this definition doesn't make sense, and maybe there are some gap that we need to figure out. Okay, so with that, we know that we have a hard deadline in September. Let's go backward to our next step after fact-finding. Not yet the juicy analysis. It is the scope and note step. So scoping here, from the clarified question, is still very ambiguous. We can still going into very different directions, and it, like, you know, like if we have so many directions, it can take so long, and we might not meet the deadline in September. So I scope it down to a very specific question. Is there a difference in behavior among customers based on how long they have been with us? So the hypothesis here is that, well, let's call how long they have been with us is the tenure. And the hypothesis is that, does tenure make any difference in behavior among customers? So you might wonder, what is the behavior here? And it is basically reading through the doc. Whatever actions that we have data with, we will note it down. Because sometimes they give us a long list of 20, 30 things, but we only have data for 10 activities. And that's something we need to communicate with our stakeholders. Once we reach an agreement, we need to note it down somewhere so that later on we can come back and say, okay, I have delivered these all acceptance criteria for you for this chunk. If you need more, we can talk more about it. Yeah, and so we at Unbounce, we use Jira software. It's a product management software. So we just note down the description context of this ticket, the value we bring to the business, and then what are the acceptance criteria to make sure that this ticket is considered successful. Okay. And finally, after the step, we can come to our data analysis part. Let's answer this question. And in this step, we have 3 smaller steps. The first thing is data preparation. Second is coming to the statistical analysis. And last but not least, we interpret the result. And throughout these steps, we have some other project management and collaboration steps as well. We discuss the data approach with our team, doing some peer reviews, peer coding, and then once we have reached some result, we need to discuss with stakeholders to see if we're going on the right direction or not. Yeah. Never wait until the end when you finish all the report and everything looks so flashy, and then you present to your stakeholder and stakeholders say, oh, maybe this is not what I'm looking for. Then all your work would go into trash. So yeah, this step, discuss early result with stakeholder, is so important. So let's talk about the data preparation part. The question we want to answer is in this yellow circle. Is there a difference in behavior among customers based on how long they have been with us? And looking through the list in the document, initial document, I see that, oh, we have data for some of these activities. We do have the number of published pages that they have all time. So during their tenure, the number of pages that have been published with multiple variants, and then etc. The number of pages that have been published with smart traffic. So smart traffic, like I mentioned before, is our AI power tool. So it's pretty cool. But reading through this list, there is a problem. It is the bias of time, because the longer customer have been with us, obviously they have more time, the longer time to publish page. So for example, a customer who have been with us for a year, they might have 10 page, but a customer who just joined us yesterday, they haven't got that enough time to publish the first page yet. And so we have that bias of time. We need to normalize. And in order to normalize this, I decided that for the number of published pages all time, I would turn that into the proportion of days during their tenure they use for publishing. So in that case, a person who have been with us for a year but published nothing, the proportion will be 0 compared to someone who have been with us for just like 7 days, and then they use their 7 days publishing, that will be 1. So proportion of 1 compared to 0, obviously that person who have been with us for a week is more engaged with Unbounce. Yeah. And for other features, I normalize that, well, percentage of pages have been published with multiple variants, and percent of page have been published with smart traffic. Cool. So is there any questions so far before I move on to the next slide? Okay, sounds good.
Oh, hey, quick question.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was muted. So just in this analysis, you're essentially, when you say like, is there a difference in behavior? What you're really kind of looking at is like how often they're setting up pages and maybe like the different characteristics of those pages. You're not necessarily looking at like the KPI of like the marketing campaign, whether that's like, you know, clicks, click-through rate, cost per clicks, things like that. You're just kind of looking at the overall setup of these pages, not necessarily how well they performed.
Yeah, exactly. Just like their pure behavior, how engaged they are with the Unbounce product.
Gotcha.
Yeah, thank you for your question. Okay, so like I mentioned previously, we have our hypothesis. Our null hypothesis here is that tenure does not have any impact on skill level our customer have. And because we gonna separate our customers into multiple samples based on their tenure, those samples will be independent from each other. None of the sample will have customers from the other sample. Okay, so before I decide which techniques of statistical analysis I want to use for this hypothesis testing, I want to check the distribution, like the data profile of this data set. And I find this package, which is super cool, is Pandas Profiling. So instead of having to do like dot histogram for 12, 20 times, I just need to say profile report, and it will print out the summary statistics for all the columns, which is super great. So looking at this histogram, this is the histogram for the proportion of days that they use publishing over their tenure. What do you see? How can you describe this histogram?
Lots of early engagement.
Sorry,
That
can you
drops
say it
off.
again?
Lots of early engagement, but it drops off. So,
So this essentially say that, well, a lot of times, for example, like if that person with a year of tenure publish a lot of zeros, means that like this is normal behavior in a lot of products that I've seen so far, not just Unbounce, but other people. Like, yeah, like you say, maybe they engage early, but then later on they don't engage anymore. They set the page up and send traffic, and traffic just comes constantly, but they don't do any other actions. So that 1 year tenure, they might not publish as frequently as before. And that gives us this very right skew data set. Yeah. And it's not a normal distribution. So that piece is so important to understand. Like, it's not a normal distribution. So when we come back to our hypothesis, would you say we should do a Mann-Whitney or a t-test? Yes, so that would be the Mann-Whitney, because Mann-Whitney U-test is a non-parametric test, and non-parametric test doesn't assume the distribution, while parametric tests depend on the distribution. And so understanding that our distribution looks very right skew, we're gonna use Mann-Whitney. And another note is that all the features that I'm using in this analysis are all continuous values. So Mann-Whitney makes sense. Cool. So with Mann-Whitney, we can say that we can tell the statistical significance difference among groups. However, I want to introduce the second notion to this test. It is the practical significance. And sometimes the practical significance is super easy to set up. Like, you just calculate for that sample, what is proportion of that sample compared to the whole population of customers. We don't want to target the group that only have one customer. And this is important to know and discuss with your stakeholder. And the second thing is, how big is the difference in median among the groups? Sometimes the Mann-Whitney will give you that, oh, these groups are statistical difference. But when you take a look at how different is the mean, maybe it's just like 0.01. Do you care about that? Do your stakeholders care about that? So these are the things you want to discuss in terms of like, how many people are there in the group, and if you can translate that into revenue. Like, we only have 10 people in this group, but this group contribute 80% of our revenue. Then we definitely care about that group. So that being said, there are two notions here: statistical significance and practical significance. And it's very important to check both. So with all my analysis, sadly enough, I cannot reject the null hypothesis and still conclude that, well, tenure does not have any impact on skill level of our customers. Okay, so at this step, like, communicate the result with stakeholders, still the result interpretation, because I say, okay, maybe tenure does not make sense to use to like differentiate a group, but maybe other features will. And so after talking to stakeholder, we come up with a follow-up analysis. We, instead of using tenure, I use like the current number of published pages. Okay, so the follow-up analysis, following all those steps before, still, I cannot reject the whole null hypothesis. Like, our customer do everything. It's so hard to distinguish the skill level. And sometimes at this point, like when I communicate the result, my recommendation, and discuss the next steps to stakeholder, we conclude that, well, if we continue on this path to figure out what are the groups based on the skill level, it will take a long time. Maybe we're going on a long route to target our customers. If you already have specific use case for customers that you want to target, let's draw on that, because it is a path that is more certain than the skill level path, because we do have a deadline. And I say that, well, like if I do have time, this is the skill level questions is a very interesting questions I want to pursue, but you have the deadline and I don't want you to run late for it. So let's move on and go to a more certain path. So yeah, after that communication step, we agree on the scope of the next analysis. We just want to understand, okay, how many customers do we have in each use case that my stakeholder define? And these steps, like, I don't think there are any statistical analysis we need to do like man with me like before. It's super easy, like just estimate how many customers do that activities, and like what is the proportion of that group compared to the whole population. But the very hard step in this analysis is to gather the data. We do have our database with tracking all the events. However, the use case that my stakeholder give to me are so specific that I need to like poke around different developer groups to say, hey, do you save this somewhere? Maybe in an S3 bucket that I can gather the data. And so I work closely with our lead developer in this data ask to just like figure out the right data to answer this question. And you may wonder, oh, hey, it's September already. Did you finish this project? I would say no, I'm still here. And by the time, like, as I'm talking to you now, I just wrap up the project, send it out for reviews. And although I still have 2 more things to figure out where to get the data, but just because I already covered 80% of the ask, I talked to my stakeholder. This communicating result part is so important again. I talked to my stakeholder and saying, okay, we're hitting our deadline. I only cover 80%. Are you happy enough? I'm gonna try for the rest of the day. If I cannot get these 2 data points for you, are you still happy to get this report? And she say, okay, yeah, that's totally fine with her. And so, yeah, well, tomorrow I'm gonna meet her and do this step, like communication, the result, and recommend the next steps. So that concludes my story. And well, if you don't take away anything from that story, it's totally fine. The key takeaways here is that well, the decision science, like if any, they say that, well, data is oil for companies. If you don't sell your data, data is only oil if you know how to use it to make informed decisions. And so the decision science is so important for each company. And data analysis here is far away from the business. And in order to bring data closer to the business, we need project management skill set. A lot of communication. The next message I want to send with you is that context is key. Like understanding this, like before figuring out the solutions, is so important to understand the root problem. If I understand the root problem of my stakeholders, just to target the most effective group for that feature, maybe we just go ahead and do the second step, like estimating how many people is in each use case and get done with that and move on. But we are going the long route because I didn't ask to the end point, to the end goal of that project. Okay, the next key takeaway is really this hashtag is one team, one dream. None of, like, the business cannot survive only with data. They need someone to make decisions. And sometimes data is not available or you need help from other teams. So really, you're not alone. Be sure to reach out to people and yeah. And last but not least, people say that, well, cleaning data takes most of the time. I agree with this point, but let's remove it. No, it's not. Gathering the right data takes most of the time, because poking around to get the data, like I told you, I have to work with my lead developer, and then preparing the data for different techniques takes so long. Yeah. With that, I want to wrap up my presentation here and go for Q&A.